Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Bill Kristol with us today. We'll chat with Bill in just a little while, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So it's just me and Maddie today. Jen is out on a much-deserved break, and she'll be back next week. So let's get into our big thing of the week, which is Epstein. It's one of those things which is just utterly fascinating to me to watch it unfolding. 10 years ago, Donald Trump said I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any supporters. And this Epstein thing is kind of like people are going, hey, wait a second. Stop that man. He just shot someone on Fifth Avenue. That's what it feels like. Like, for whatever reason, this is the thing that has awakened them from their state of cryogenic frozenness. It is driving a wedge through MAGA world like we've not seen before. Now, the fascinating things that are occurring are Trump's ever-changing narratives. You know, we went from Pam Bondi in February saying, I have the files and the Epstein list right here. She pointed to her desk, right here on my desk. Then it became, as we know recently, there's no files, there's no list, there's nothing. Move along. We're not going to prosecute anybody. There's no there. Thank you for coming. Don't forget to tip your waiters and waitresses on the way out. And then it became, okay, there are files, maybe a list, but it's all a Democrat hoax. It's all Comey and Obama and Biden. They made it all up. And then it became, all right, let's go down to Florida and talk to Ghislaine Maxwell to get the information that is likely in the files we just told you didn't exist before we told you it's a Democrat hoax. And that opens up a whole can of worms, because now there's all this talk about possibility of Maxwell getting a commuted or reduced sentence or a pardon. And that would be a catastrophe within MAGAville. And so now this shifting narrative also is, when asked why he ended his friendship with Epstein, Trump had originally said it was because I thought he was a creep. And now the excuse is he was poaching employees from me, which is interesting because from a timeline perspective, when he apparently would have been poached, that was like 2 years before Trump publicly said, Epstein's a great guy. I love him. I hang out with him all the time, whatever. But let's play this clip.
Mr. President, did one of those stolen persons, does that include Virginia Jeffrey?
I don't know. I think she worked at the spa. I think so. I think that was one of the people. He stole her.
He stole her. Let me repeat that. Stole. S-T-O-L-E. That's how he referred to the then 16-year-old victim, Virginia Giuffre. I mean, this is some serious 1977 Huggy Bear pimp shit, right? Like, I mean, forget the fact that he changed his story from Epstein's a creep to he took employees from me. But call me crazy, but if the world is watching you right now, with many in that world thinking that maybe you had something to do with sex trafficking, you might want to use a different word than stole, okay? And then he sends Todd Blanche, his former personal attorney, down to Florida to meet with Maxwell. She then comes back with a whole list of demands. She wants immunity. She wants to see the questions in advance. She wants testimony that take place outside of prison, all of which was rejected by the House Oversight Committee, which would be conducting this hearing where she would testify. But she also has a hearing pending that's going to be before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court came out, I think, yesterday and said we'll make a decision in September about whether we will hear the case. So because of that, the likelihood if she's subpoenaed and it goes into the Oversight Committee, she's going to invoke her Fifth Amendment rights pending appeal. To me, this whole Epstein thing not only has legs and doesn't feel like it's going away, it actually feels like we're at some kind of inflection point.
Yeah, I would agree. I think a lot of times Trump changes his narrative on so many other topics. The tariffs were for one reason, to bring jobs back. The tariffs were to bring factory, whatever. He has 80 reasons for the tariffs, and nobody in his base gives a crap. But this, they do care about because he promoted this conspiracy for his entire election time. And then Wednesday, actually, the Wall Street Journal had a really interesting analysis of 125 conservative Trumpy podcasts. And they found that Epstein in over 3,000 episodes was mentioned in the last year. And so he has been feeding this beast. And now he's suddenly saying, oh, no, there's nothing to see here. I think he's always been politically savvy with his base. We both hate him, but I think we have to say that his base, who are insane, cultish, he's been pretty much on target to keep them solid. And this is the first time where he's totally flailing. He has no idea how to handle this.
Yeah, and it's a good point about the podcasters because we are seeing podcasters like Joe Rogan and Andrew Schultz who appeal to millions and millions of listeners, a lot of them young men, a critical constituency, which the Democratic Party had lost, especially in this last election. You know, someone like Joe Rogan, he said, quote, the Trump administration is trying to gaslight you. And then there's Schultz. He was sitting around this week with a bunch of other guys, and this is what he had to say.
He is rebuking the base, like almost like spitting in their face. Like they're asking for it. He campaigned on it. He puts Bongino and Cash in there, which might be the stupidest thing in the history of the world. Like, why would you put the two guys that have nonstop pounded the pavement talking about how we're going to expose this Epstein thing? Mm-hmm. And the second they get in there, like, you better shut the fuck up.
They have to shut him up.
Go on Rogan, lie. Mm-hmm. Like, it is a very peculiar thing. It worked in that I think it moved any of the smoke off of Trump because, at least for me, I was like, there's no way that he's involved if he's putting Bongino and Cash in who have campaigned on exposing it. Like, why would you hire those guys or appoint those guys? Right? So I'm like, he can't be. But the fact that he will not touch this, and then this last week, him doing the bullshit distractions, dropping the MLK file. Like, who asked for the MLK file?
Yeah.
Now, that's really interesting because podcasters like Joe Rogan and Andrew Schultz, these guys influence tens of millions of people. Like, this is not something anybody should take lightly. That if this continues, if the formerly pro-Trump media ecosystem continues to drive that wedge deeper into MAGAville, and when you consider how elections these days are won and lost on the margins, all it takes is a few million people to go, that's right, I was gaslit. Fuck him. And we've got different elections. But, you know, a lot of people that I talk to don't seem to understand why Epstein is the thing that is causing this mini civil war within MAGA. For years, Donald Trump and also Kash Patel and Pam Bondi and Dan Bongino and others in Trump world kept drilling into the head of MAGA that there is this deep state that is out to get you, that they are keeping things from you. They are rich, they are powerful, they are Democrats, they are pedophiles, they are grooming children, they are drinking the blood of babies in the basement of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. There is no way we can stop this unless you put me in the White House and you give control of Congress to Republicans, and we will stamp out the deep state. We will, instead of having all of these files kept secret and kept away from you, we will make all of it public. We will expose these perverts. We will prosecute them. We will imprison them. We will take down the deep state. because you deserve to see what's in these files. And now what are they doing? They're saying, oh, maybe the deep state is us because we're doing the same thing. That's what MAGA's hearing. MAGA is hearing, wait a second. You told me to give you guys all the power and we will get to the bottom of this shit. And now you're acting just like the deep state. And it's important to understand, to go back 10 years, QAnon, MAGA, this appeals to every one of their touch points. Sex, crime, power, secrets, elitism, conspiracy, but it pushes every one of their buttons. And that's how he rode to power. And for them to feel like now, when there's no excuse why he can't release these files, there is literally nothing to stop him from releasing all this information. They know what they were promised. They know who promised it to them. They know it's not Democrats. They know it's not a hoax. They were told the government has been running by these deep state Democrats, pedophiles. And that's why they're starting to think, is there a cover-up? And more importantly, who are they protecting?
To your point, the most compelling message to his base to vote for him was that he said, only I can do this. Only I can fix this. Only I can fix that. And he pretended to be a populist and, pretended to be just like them. And they all related to that. And now I think what's happened is the fever has broken on his media bubble. He always controlled the narrative on everyone that covered him, whether it's OAN or Fox News or all of the podcasters. Now, I think Fox is still in it with him, but, we had the Wall Street Journal. We now have, obviously, this slew of incredibly powerful podcasters. And so he's lost control of the narrative, and he's flailing in ways that we've never seen him flail with his base before.
Yeah, and the ultimate flail and the ultimate fail is this. Because his latest narrative shift, as well as his cronies, this is the talking point. Like if there was a memo that was emailed out to everyone, I'm sure this was it. Ask, why didn't Democrats do anything with this in the 4 years that they had it? Because that's what he's saying now. If there was something in it that was so bad, Democrats with Biden, they had control for 4 years. Like, why didn't they release it? If I'm MAGA, I'm going, exactly. That's the fucking point. That's why we elected you. We elected you because they weren't doing anything with it, because they were in power and because they were the guilty ones. They were protecting themselves. We put you in power so you could take them down. Not to now be in the White House going, well, I'm not going to do it because they didn't do it. Like, it's unfathomable to me how he thinks that's going to be acceptable to MAGA.
Well, what you just said is essentially what Dan Bongino said on his podcast every week. Once Trump's in there, we're going to get the list, we're going to get everything out. And of course, all of these people lie so much that he would make up, and so would all of the others, that they had inside knowledge. They had people inside the FBI who said it's really explosive, and when it comes out, Bill Clinton's going to go to jail, or, Hillary, anything and everything. So to his narrative, it's like, well, maybe the Democrats didn't release it because it was all bad things about Democrats. I mean, it doesn't work to put the genie back in the bottle for him.
No, look, he created this beast. He fed this beast, and this beast is now devouring him. And I don't know what he can do about it, because just from a psychological standpoint, conspiracies never really end.
No, you can't stop them.
And even if they get almost everything you think they want, they'll be asking for more.
Absolutely.
But if you give them nothing, then that's not good. It's very difficult to be relishing in the absolute deliciousness of this, because at the same time, we have to understand, what is at the root of all this is the heinous crimes committed against teenage girls. Not one, not two, a ton. So when he says he stole her from me, well, let's just analyze this a bit. he stole her from, spa, not spa. They worked. Like, what did Epstein do at that time? He was like a financier. He was managing like a private portfolio. He wasn't running no fucking spa. He wasn't sitting there going like, you know what? That girl does some great mani-pedis. Ghislaine, get her ASAP. That's not what was happening, right? So the question has to be asked, stole her for what? Where was she going? Where was a 16-year-old girl going? Was she going to help him manage the financial portfolio? No. Where was she going? So there's all these questions.
And these are real people. Virginia, her family are devastated at what Trump has said. We know that she was 16 at the time, 41 this year when she committed suicide. And it's devastating probably for innumerable victims. And how many other suicides have already happened or will happen.
Yeah, and her family just spoke out begging for Maxwell not to be pardoned. But just imagine if Maxwell were to get released from prison and or pardoned. Forget MAGA. What about the families? What about the families of these victims who would sit there and go, that's it. So nobody got punished for this. All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My loser this week is Doge. A new report that the Senate Democrats just released shows that they generated nearly $23 billion in government waste, while at the same time creating personal turmoil and human suffering. My winner are the 3 U.S. allies, France, Britain, and Canada, for their courageous diplomatic leadership. France set the precedent by committing to Palestinian state recognition, with Britain and Canada conditionally joining.
My winner, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who continues to show big, bad global balls in standing up to Trump, despite the grifter of the free world's threat of tariffs, unless the charges against corrupt former President Bolsonaro are dropped. My loser, Republican senators, for confirming Emil Bove to a lifetime appointment as a federal appeals court judge, despite being perhaps the most unqualified, dangerous, Constitution-violating nominee in history. And that brings us to the weekly rant. So let's talk about this Bove confirmation, a reprehensible lifetime appointment as a federal appeals court judge, despite extraordinarily damning, disqualifying testimony from 3 whistleblowers. It was a 50-49 vote. Democrats were aghast at how unqualified, incompetent, and dangerous Bove is, while Republicans were all too happy to once again demonstrate their pathetic, cowardly fealty to the king. Donald Trump wanted Bove on the court, and Republicans dutifully obeyed, demonstrating yet again their loyalty to him and not the Constitution or the American people, who they were elected to serve and who pays them. Here's who Bove is. He is a Trump former personal attorney. According to the whistleblowers, he instructed subordinates to ignore judicial orders and that they may have to tell the courts, quote, "fuck you," over Trump's deportation policy, who threatened to fire prosecutors who didn't back his plan to kill the charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams in his quid pro quo deal, and who lied to senators under oath during his confirmation hearing. Bove is so horrible that over 900 former Department of Justice prosecutors and dozens of former federal and state judges opposed his nomination, urging the Senate to summarily reject him. Republicans should be ashamed of themselves. Bove's confirmation is such a stunning dereliction of duty and abdication of their responsibility of advising consent, even for this shameless gaggle of suck-ups. And now this openly defiant Trump crony with zero respect for the rule of law and utterly lacking neutrality will sit for life in judgment of others, while Trump likely paves the way for him to eventually replace Clarence Thomas on the U.S. Supreme Court. And at 44, that would mean Bove, a faithful Trump and MAGA servant, could conceivably sit on the highest court for 40-plus years, which would not only be a vomitous stain on this once prestigious institution, but more so, an unbridled threat to our judicial system and democracy itself. Let's get to Bill Kristol. For 3 decades, he has been a leading participant in American political debates and a widely respected analyst of American political developments. He served in senior positions in the Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush administrations and as a professor at the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard University. He is the founding director of Defend Democracy Together, an organization dedicated to defending America's liberal democratic norms, principles, and institutions, focusing on issues ranging from American foreign policy to the future of the Republican Party and the meaning of American conservatism. Bill was a co-founder of The Weekly Standard. He is the editor-at-large of The Bulwark and frequently appears on all the major television talk shows and also is host of the highly regarded video series and podcast, Conversations with Bill Kristol. Bill, welcome into the back room.
It's great to be with you. Nice to meet you, if only on screen, but still.
That's where we all are these days.
True.
Feels
True.
like COVID sometimes. So you have been a staunch conservative and one of the most prominent conservative voices for decades. How unrecognizable to you is today's Republican Party?
I thought you were going to say how unrecognizable to me is me, so which is
well, that's
not a very
that's a good point because to me you are pretty unrecognizable.
It's
but
a
I
mildly
like
interesting
this
question.
Bill Kristol a lot.
It's a mildly interesting question to me and to my wife, not to the rest of the world. No, it is unrecognizable, and it's not just a kind of a talking point or a cute observation. It's a very important fact of contemporary American politics, and it's one, incidentally, that Trump and his supporters boast about, really, and I guess they're entitled to in a sense. They have totally taken over, destroyed to some degree, and then just co-opted and taken over and intimidated the Republican Party that existed from a 15-year, well, to till about 2015, I would say, until 2016 maybe, when he was actually nominated and elected. And it's their party now. And it is a good lesson. And you think these things are kind of stable. You and I grew up watching the Dems and the Republicans, and we had different preferences there, I think. But they were pretty, honestly, it didn't change that much, right? There were the ups and downs, and there's Clinton versus, whatever, and Bush versus Reagan. But at the end of the day, if we had left, the country, gone to Mars for 25 years in 1985, let's say, and come back in 2010, we would recognize the two parties. A lot of the names would even be the same, but also, we would Clinton and Bush and so forth, but we would more or less identifiable ideological entities, coalitions, and Trump has changed all that. So this is why he is really a consequential figure. I don't like him. You don't like him, I don't believe. I wish he weren't, but we can't close our eyes. Some of our liberal friends, I think, do try to do this a little bit. Like it's going away. When will the fever break? I remember that was a big thing about 6, 7, 8 years ago. And even then I had the sense, this is not just a fever that's breaking. This is I don't know what metaphor you want, a disease or something. It has to be dealt with, and it's much more than just a fever.
So along those lines, you worked for Ronald Reagan, which, Ronald Reagan to me seems like 1,000 years ago for a lot of reasons. How would you define the core values of the party during his era? And how do those compare to the values you see driving the party today? So I want to get in a little bit of the weeds with you on that.
I mean, there have always been big coalitions. American parties are, if they're only two parties and they're, 140, 150, 160 million voters in the country. Obviously, they're going to have a lot of different people voting for them for different reasons and appealing to them on different issues. But for me, I'd say it was above all anti-communism and foreign policy. I started off as Hubert Humphrey, Scoop Jackson Democrat. I volunteered for Scoop when I was a college student in his 1972 presidential campaign and the primaries. That was the beginning of my very successful political career. I think he got 4% of the vote in Massachusetts, where I was then, and had to pull out. I worked for Pat Moynihan in the summer of '76. The first real campaign I worked on just for a summer when I was in grad school. So I, like a lot of people, I moved over to Reagan, and I wasn't happy about the Carter administration, and especially again for foreign policy reasons, moved over to the Republicans and Reagan in 1980, came to Washington in 85, was a Reagan Republican. So for me, though I worked in domestic policy at the beginning in the Reagan, for the years I was in the Reagan, 3 years I was in the Reagan administration, it was mostly foreign policy, American strength, both strength in foreign policy, but also democracy promotion, standing up for liberty. Carter was, for all the talk about human rights, was sort of nice to various, it seemed to us too nice to various dictators. In economics, kind of free market, obviously. I'd say I was always a little less on the extreme free market side and a little more on the, look, there's a room for obviously the welfare state as well, but, still thinking we could get more economic growth if we had somewhat less regulation, somewhat more incentives for people to do that. Social issues always complicated. I was inclined to the more conservative side, probably more then than I am now, honestly. It was, I thought it was in a modern capitalist democracy, everyone's for change, everyone's for the new stuff, and you sort of forget the arguments for tradition. So I was a little bit on that side too. So I'd say that was the three stools: foreign policy, hawkishness, free markets, and let's call it traditional, more or less traditional values. Now, there were always undersides to this, and people like today to point out there were these elements that were much more like Trump, and that's fair enough. That is true. You can't, 70 million people, as I say, they're going to be all kinds of people in your party. And I would say, and I think we went along with some of those elements too much. I also think, to be fair, we fought a lot of those elements. I spent the 90s fighting Pat Buchanan. Reagan was very pro-immigration and really tried very hard to push back against that nativist side of the Republican Party and the isolationist, all those traditions from before on the Republican side. So I think it's fair to say that the party wasn't quite as pretty a picture as some of us Reaganites and George H.W. Bush administration veterans like to say, but it also was really different from today's Trump party.
And you mentioned 2010 before. In your view, was that the point where the party started to really diverge from Reagan-era conservatism? And was there catalysts that you sort of remember around that time that really accelerated that shift?
So it's obviously very interesting. It's a good question, a very interesting one that I'm not sure. I mean, writing the history of that, historians will spend a fair amount of time debating different elements. I would say, for me, the key is Trump. That is, I don't think things were foreordained. I don't think it was inevitable that the party would go in this direction. 2010, the Tea Party, I think it's fair to say, was a bit of a harbinger, and I think it's fair that people look back at that. At the time, I sort of had a somewhat sanguine view of the Tea Party, kind of populist. They were a little extreme, a little simple-minded, you might say, honestly, about policy. But still, it was a sort of healthy reaction. And I thought at the time it could be channeled into the more mainstream Republican Party, the way other movements have been over the years in both parties. That's how the two-party system, when it was healthy, worked. There were these movements that came up. They weren't entirely comfortable with the establishment of either party. Certainly think of the Democrats, civil rights movement, the environmental movement, the feminist movement. Those were all hostile, not just to conservatives, but to the establishment of the Democratic Party to some degree. And they challenged it. And then some of the challenge worked, some of it didn't, and they got incorporated, So I thought that about the Tea Party. I took comfort in 2012 from the fact that Romney and Paul Ryan were the ticket. I thought that was a reasonable ticket. And they lost, but it was respectable against an incumbent president. And then suddenly but I underestimated, I suppose, the resentment against the elites, the resentment against the backlash against the Iraq War, the backlash against the 2008 financial crisis. I really underestimated the nativism, I've got to say. You asked which elements. I do think that was so big, and obviously, I guess, in Trump's appeal. He got kind of lucky. 2015, if you can call terrible events luck, he got 2015 coincided with some terrorist attacks, actually here, and also, or at least quasi-terrorist attacks here, and certainly abroad in France, the very famous ones, in Europe. And then the migration crisis in Europe, which Fox News made it seem like they were coming here, and they made it seem like that crisis was the same as our border challenges from Mexico, which is a little ridiculous when you think about it for 2 seconds, but whatever, And Trump is a good demagogue, and he exploited that mercilessly. I guess I just couldn't quite believe that the country in 2015, after all these years, would go for this kind of nativism. Certainly slides into real bigotry. I should have known, when I edited the Weekly Standard, conservative magazine, we would do these cruises with some of our, people would pay extra and come on those, and we'd have panels, and it was a little bit reduced our deficit a little bit, and they were pleasant with our subscribers. And in 06, 07, 08 about, suddenly they became sort of testy, and I won't say unpleasant, but they were genuine, more than just polite exchanges of views. And the issue was immigration. And I remember thinking, the people who come on these cruises are reasonably well off. It's not nothing to go to, certainly the European ones, but even to go to the Caribbean, right? They're not suffering personally. They're not people whose jobs were hollowed out, mostly in middle America, who lost a job to an immigrant who wanted to work in the fields and in agriculture or in hospitality and hotels. These were people who had done well, many of them retired or getting close to retirement. That's who goes on cruises. And they were really angry. And I guess I sort of dismissed it. I just couldn't quite understand why. A lot of them were from places where there were very few immigrants. And I remember on these panels, I would say, I'm here in Northern Virginia. We have a lot of immigrants and a lot of, both because it's been a major resettlement area at different times, the Vietnamese in 78, the government, it's easy for the government to probably deal with people in Northern Virginia, so they settled a lot of people here. And also just naturally, people who've come here, it's a growing area, plenty of jobs, a lot of construction, a lot of hotels and stuff. And so it's been a bit of a magnet for migrants and immigrants of all kinds, legal, undocumented, all different people from Central Latin America, people from Asia, as I said. And I said, it's fine. I mean, if you ask, we're all happy that these people are here. There are occasional problems, obviously. Schools get a little overcrowded. They don't have enough ESL teachers. There's some crime. But, on the whole, the place has flourished, and they flourished. And that it's not a big issue. And the kids literally were going to school with my kids at the time, and we're doing fine. We're doing great, so far as I can tell. Now, we live in an upper middle class part of Fairfax County. It's a little more challenging in other areas. I understand that. But anyway, I totally missed and underestimated the nativism, I guess. What do you think? Did you see that coming? I really feel like I just didn't see that.
Well, it's interesting you used the word bigotry before because, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was going to say that nativism or nationalism, whatever word we want to use, just seems like a different word for what I feel it really is, which is racism. I mean, I've always felt that somehow, and largely with Donald Trump, this torrent of bigotry was unleashed, where he literally, well, not literally, but it was as if he literally said to a good proportion of this country, you could take the masks off now. Just, I'm here. I'm in the White House. I'm you. You are me. I'll protect you. That he literally said, I will protect you. I will pay for your legal defenses if you do certain things that I like that are violent. Because there's still a lot of folks in this country that haven't gotten over the Civil War yet. That would, as crazy as it sounds, there are people I think would love to bring slavery back. I think there are people who, no matter how high they climb the socioeconomic ladder, they still think that Black and brown people are taking things away from them. The whole white replacement theory. And it's that, when I think of that, to answer your question, it really makes me not feel really good about this country where we are right now. But you mentioned Europe. Europe's been going through it for years. I'm a Jew and I remember the Holocaust, so scapegoating has always been prevalent. And I think we're going through a period in this country where it's just miserable scapegoating. We see it every day on television, masked, unidentified, I'll call them ICE agents, but I have no idea who they are because they're not identified. Just literally taking people off the streets, putting them God knows where, sending them to foreign countries, putting them in buildings surrounded by alligators. I mean, it is insane what's happening in this country right now. And I think it's all due to racism.
Yeah, I mean, when I said nativism, nationalism is sort of different. I think nativism, I've always assumed is a kind of racism, or at least it could be directed against Italians and Irish, though at the time they thought they were sort of different races too. So anyways, but I agree with your point. I very much agree with your point. I think Trump dipped his toe in it, sort of, and he had some of it in his background, obviously, but he dipped his toe in it with the Obama birther stuff. But for me, this was, again, I guess I kidded myself. That went. I guess it took off in certain circles, but ultimately it went nowhere in 2012. Mitt Romney did not run a campaign that talked about Obama's birth certificate. He ran against Obama. They ran a pretty civilized campaign. They got 98% of the vote between them. I mean, you didn't feel like a huge chunk of the country was obsessing about this anymore. I think I was kidding myself a little bit on that. Trump dipped his toe in it in 2015, 16, and Mexican rapists and all, but even the degree to which we've, under Trump, progressed, if you want to, or regressed over 8, 9, 10 years is really striking to me. And I think I do agree that he started to take the mask off. People didn't object. Some of the more respectable people, some of whom used to be friends of mine who went along with Trump, were like, well, that's unfortunate. But, I don't even know if they say it's unfortunate anymore, though. And certainly lots of people out there love it. And you can just tell that. from the rallies and from public opinion polls and from the policies. The immigration stuff I find horrifying. It's not immigration, I shouldn't even say. The deportation stuff. I mean, immigration policy, you can respectably say,
Sure, absolutely.
the border should be tighter, or maybe we should have there's nothing, 1.5 million legal immigrants isn't written in stone. It could be 1.2, it could be 1.8, it could be, right? I mean, that's a policy issue to some degree, colored by bigotry sometimes, but often it's a policy issue. The deportation stuff I find jaw-dropping. The way it's being done, I find horrifying. And he has lost some poll numbers on it. I think most people are put off by it, but they're not put off enough to really desert Trump, and they're not so put off that he still doesn't have a lot of support on that issue. I just can't believe people see what's happening with the ICE, as you say, the masked ICE agents and maybe some non-ICE agents seizing people who literally have been here 20 years, who are working, have families, who have kids. There's zero doing, we should be happy they're here. Now, we should have worked out a way to help regularize their status, and maybe not all of them checked every box absolutely correctly and as they went through the process, but a huge number of them, incidentally, were checking in with ICE. If you're on temporary protected status, you check in every month. If a lot of the people who are being arrested in courtrooms where they're showing up for their appointments with the federal government, and that these people are being seized and sent to God knows where and then sent off to other God knows where places. I feel like there should be huge revulsion at that, honestly, among the American public. And there's some, but not enough.
Well, there's certainly revulsion among Democrats. We also see that he's cratering with independents. And given how elections in the last several years are typically won and lost on the margins, I think he is losing some of his base. When I talk to a lot of my liberal friends, sometimes I have to explain to them that we don't need 75 million people to desert Donald Trump. I'll take 3 million. I'll take 5 million. And I think that's happening, especially among the independents. But, with regard to the immigration issue in terms of racism, you see then what he's done with immigrants from South Africa. Like, hey, come on board. Come here, welcome. Like, there's no rhyme or reason to anything other than color, race, ethnicity. And it's blatant. It's blatant and it's shameless.
No, I think that's the South Africa stuff's unbelievable right now. I mean, I suppose not the counter argument, but the qualification could be, look, he's appealing to parts of his base that are totally racist, and that's what the South Africa thing's about. It's also, I don't know, a few hundred people they've let in somewhere. It's not. It's a sop to them. You could argue, not a major part, a fundamental part of what he's up to, except some of the other stuff is a major. The deportation thing, again, I even thought in 2024, they had those signs at the Republican convention. Do you remember mass deportation? I thought it's a little crazy to have those signs, but people are going to be a little spooked. And mostly in the campaign, they pretended it was more going after the criminals, though they were blatantly racist. And what were the Haitian immigrants in Springfield about? That was the moment, I think, where I just thought, of course, I was against Trump anyway, but I thought this is going to really kill them. I mean, how can people, including people in Ohio, where these Haitians are working hard and living peacefully in Springfield, where the Republican governor of Ohio is happy they're there. The Republican mayor of Springfield, Ohio is happy they were there. I happened to be in Cincinnati in early September when that was all blowing up. And Cincinnati's about 70 miles or something from Springfield. So there are a lot of people who knew a lot about it. And they were just like, what is going on? This is not an issue. I mean, there are tight, small issues. This is like number 46 on our list of issues in, Southern Ohio to worry about. And J.D. Vance is going on about it. Trump mentions it at the debate. They're eating dogs and cats or something. It was so racist and so, what's the word I'm looking for? Performative and just ridiculous in terms of actual policy matter that I thought they've gone too far, but they didn't. They weren't. I mean, that part is very depressing, I think. And again, they're not paying as much of a price as they should. I agree with you, of course, about several million votes would make a huge difference. But there, I'd say the one thing to cut a little against the optimism side, that's what's excited about, which I'm pretty optimistic about 2026 and all that. But the amount of damage he's doing to the federal government is really extensive. And it's going to take a long time to fix. I mean, I don't envy, even if a Democratic president, even whoever your favorite one is or my favorite one, if I had one, wins, I mean, they're going to look at a Justice Department I was talking to someone who works there. A lot of people will have left. They can't stand it. It's intolerable if you want to behave honorably at this point for a lot of those jobs. They're being replaced by Trumpy people. They've changed the civil service rules or ignoring them, overriding them to bring in basically political appointees, even if they don't call it political appointees. And so the next Democratic president is going to be looking at a Justice Department, Homeland Security, all the money flowing in there. God knows who's being hired for these ICE jobs, right? I mean, just the magnitude of the task to fix the government, and then of course other parts of the country, and society, and to repair the damage, and they move forward with an actual agenda for the 21st century. It's just a massive task. So Trump is doing the damage he's doing. Is bad. It's really unnerving.
Yeah, I was a college student back when your former boss, Reagan, was president. And I always remember hearing the phrase shining city upon a hill. When I still hear it or see it written, I got to admit, I get a little emotional because as an American, it's hard not to, in a general sense, think of your country as that. But especially today. Reagan emphasized optimism, limited government, American leadership abroad, all the things you were talking about a minute ago that the next president, regardless of party politics, has to inherit and fix. We're not the shining city upon a hill anymore, are we?
No, I mean, I hate to say that. Now, I could make a fancy argument, and you could too, about, well, it's still a decent country underneath, and there's lots that's great, a lot of stuff that's great here, and I that's all true. But no, I see Europeans a fair amount, and we talk, and they're polite in public, of course. And if their leaders feel they have to kind of play up to play up to Trump to get just defend their country's interests and get decent trade deals and so forth. But privately, they just, I mean, if they've been around a bit, they're genuinely shocked and appalled. And as you sort of intimated this, I mean, going forward, even if we have a great president, will people believe that if he says that, don't worry, we're back, we can now, we can go ahead with a real alliance and help Ukraine and really stand up to the dictators? Part of their mind over there, and this is true in Asia too, is going to be, well, that's nice. Maybe he even means it, but I don't know. Are we confident that 4 years from now, the voters will stick with that? And this is where having a Republican Party so important. It'd be so helpful if the Republican Party would liberate itself from Trump after 2028. It'd be helpful if they did it before. But if they don't, and I wouldn't say there's much sign of it right now, then you've got always this risk of this coming back, as it did in 2024, incidentally. I mean, the re-election of Trump is really bad. I mean, the election of him in 2016 was bad, but it was kind of a fluke. He was very, he got the migration issue. He had a weak, divided Republican field against him that in retrospect was weaker than one thought. Hillary Clinton turned out to be a weaker candidate than some people thought. He got to run as the voice of change against a Bush and against the Clinton, even though he'd been around a long time. He governed for 4 years. He did a fair amount of damage, but there were constraints. A lot of there were the Jim Mattises at the Defense Department and people, Kelly and many other, even people I didn't like, and didn't behave honorably 100%. They did have some lines they wouldn't cross, the Bill Barrs and the, White House counsel's office and people of that nature. People at Treasury weren't crazy. And they managed those internal guardrails, did a lot of constraining of Trump. Plus, he didn't quite know what he was doing for the first year or two. I mean, all that's gone, obviously. I mean, there's a big authoritarian movement that's grown up now that wants to go as far or further than Trump. They are staffing the administration. Trump has put in the key positions are total loyalists who will do anything. And we have a Justice Department. That part is just unrecognizable to me. We have a Justice Department that is totally politicized and personalized in terms of what Trump wants to do. You don't like someone tells you something about some university that you don't approve of, you just pull their out of federal funds. There's no pretense of like a hearing, rule of law, facts, balance, which funds do you pull? It's just, I'm going after them. And of course, with business and with the media. And unfortunately, a lot of our big institutions have felt they had to, or chose to go along or, cut deals to they would say to, save themselves for later, I suppose. But so that's again where the second term, the re-election of Trump after January 6th, and then what he's been able to do in these first 6 months. It's hard to say we're a shining city.
Yeah, well, he envisions himself king, and he's acting like one. And
Right.
unfortunately, the guardrails, the founding fathers, in all their brilliance, never really prepared us for someone like him because it was just unfathomable. They thought, okay, someone's going to come in and try to do a little thing over here, maybe a little thing over here. They didn't possibly, because we broke off. We there was a revolution against a king and a monarchy. So how could someone in this country want to do that? So they never really. We're learning that they never really prepared us for that, and so the guardrails against it. The lower courts seem to be doing a fairly good job. The Supreme Court uh, leaves much to be desired, but hopefully in the end it won't hand over the keys to democracy to him. But I'm just curious because for so long you've been such a voice of principle in the conservative party, and you alluded to this before. What has it been like to watch former colleagues rationalize or defend behavior that would have been unthinkable just a couple of decades ago?
It's been depressing. It's been surprising in many ways. I mean, I would say I'm not alone. I mean, that is to say, I remember 2016, 17, when, a lot of people I knew were talking themselves into what I'd call a sort of mild rationalization or a respectable rationalization. I don't like him. I don't support all this stuff, but we can check him. We can get some good things done. And the Democrats are too whatever. They didn't like Hillary Clinton. They're too left wing. Blah blah blah. Those people I thought were mistaken. But I thought, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm not making the right judgment. And I was very reassured that quite a few people, honestly, that I respected from my own circles, from Republican and conservative circles, were with me. I think if I'd been all alone, I'm not sure I would have had the confidence to think, that I'm necessarily right when everyone else is basically going along. But there were a few elected officials, and there were, other people on the outside, commentators and so forth, colleagues at the Weekly Standard, people with whom we started the Bulwark, Charlie Sykes and many others, Stuart Stevens, who you know or know of. And I thought, okay, I mean, I'm not crazy to think this is really dangerous. It's funny, at the time, there was all these attacks on us Never Trumpers for, you don't like his style, you don't like the tweets, but the actual substance is fine. And that even some of the kind of mainstream media sort of bought that, what is it you dislike about Trump? Just that he's a vulgar person, And I said, no, I think it's really dangerous. And on that, I'm afraid we were right. But what is interesting to me, and this is something I didn't really understand ahead of time, people start off with a kind of sophisticated, I'd say, rationalization for going along. 6 months later, it's a little, so it starts off, I don't like this and this and this, but I think we can get some good things done. And I've got my eyes open, and we're gonna push back if he tries to do this and this and this. 6 months later, it's sort of like, well, actually, some of what he's trying to do, even in those areas, isn't so bad, And I'm really impressed by some of the things he's accomplishing. 6 months after that, I actually like some of those things he's doing that I thought, they don't say it this way, but this is the truth, that they once thought really were unacceptable. They kind of talk themselves into it. I think it's very hard psychologically to maintain that in-between position. You know what I mean? It's hard. You want to be for what you're for, right? Yeah. You don't want to tell yourself all the time, well, this is not good, but I am going to be for him anyway, and I feel sort of bad about this part of it. And so the slide down that slope, though, was very fast. I mean, I'd say 20, for me, maybe from the outside, you couldn't quite see it, but for me, living here in Washington, dealing with friends at the time who were still sort of friends and really aren't, I don't see them much anymore. In 2017, it still felt like there were people you could talk to, and they would agree with you that certain stuff was bad. By 2019, we were pretty far down the path of the cult, and you're all in it. You got to be on one side or the other. After January 6th, I thought there was a moment of rethinking, and there was a moment for like 48 hours. I remember talking to Adam Kinzinger. When was January 6th? Was middle of the week, right? I remember talking Tuesday or Wednesday, I think. I remember talking to Kinzinger a day or two later, and the House Democrats had announced they were going to move to impeach Trump. And I said to Adam, and I talked, and I said, how many? A lot of Republicans will vote for that, right? And Adam was like, yeah, not as many as should, but probably 50, 60. I mean, I think out of a couple hundred, that's still get at least a quarter or a third. And I thought, okay, well, at least that's real numbers, I remember talking to him, I think, over the weekend then, and or texting with him or something, and he was like, we're losing a lot of those people. It could go down to as low as 10. And I thought that can't be. That's impossible. 190 out of 200 House Republicans are going to vote against impeaching Trump for what happened on January 6th. And of course, he was right, and that was the vote. 10 members of the House, 7 members of the Senate in the Republican Party after January 6th, when Trump wasn't going to be president anymore. There was no, why were they so scared? There's one thing if he's got the White House and you have to get along with him. That, for me, was the moment where I already had great doubts about the future of the Republican Party and the conservative movement, and I already voted for Democrats, obviously, in 2018 and 2020 and stuff. But that was like, this is pretty unsalvageable, at least for the foreseeable future. And then, of course, Trump wins the nomination and wins the election. So I think it is kind of unsalvageable for the foreseeable future. I mean, things change, of course.
You know what's fascinating to me, when you talk about the vote, no matter how sycophantically the fealty is to Trump, the undying loyalty to Trump by all these people, and the knowledge that in the end, he throws them all under the bus eventually. Like the other night, Chuck Grassley, he's still there. He's 90. He still hasn't learned. He's like, I was surprised that he went after me. Like, really, Chuck? You're surprised that he went after you? And if you're a guy like Chuck Grassley, after all you've done for Trump, and he's not the only one. There's a million like him. Do you think how come they never just go, you know what? This guy's never giving us back an ounce of loyalty in return. So why don't we just do the right thing, the thing we all would love to do, which is just to get rid of him? I mean, they could have another conservative. I mean, if J.D. Vance was president, they'd still probably get all the conservative stuff they want. But it's just astounding to me that Chuck Grassley seemed genuinely surprised that just one little thing that Trump didn't like, he went after him. And look, and Josh Hawley, that's the same thing. The same thing. It's crazy to me.
Can't tell if they are surprised or if they, it helps their dignity to look surprised, because otherwise they were just, total suckers, of course, which they were. Or do they want to go along? I mean, this is where you really do have to ask the question of how much of it are they even. I mean, they don't like it when they're personally attacked by Trump, and they fear him and they're intimidated. That is a large part of it. And it's not just a primary challenge for Chuck Grassley, presumably isn't running again. So, and Tom Tillis said he's not running again, isn't running again, and even he can't bring himself to vote against, people Beauvais or whatever for the Third Circuit and so forth. So, the degree of just, I do feel at that point we're now in a kind of, I don't know what the right, abused spouse kind of situation or whatever, where of course rationally it doesn't even make sense. There are reasons why people put up with terrible behavior from not just spouses, but from others, business, your boss, right? If you need the job and you're scared of being fired and you're going to make more money in 2 years, if you just put up with a bad boss for the next 18 months. So people have reasons why they go along with things that are pretty bad and you'd think maybe they should say are intolerable, but they won't say it. We're now beyond that. We are now at the psychological stage almost of a cult the fear's been so internalized, they've sort of forgotten why they're so scared, right? So I'm not running for re-election, but I'm still terrified, I mean, I give Liz Cheney, she only broke on, obviously, when they run up to January 6th, and then she had supported Trump sort of nominally, but still in 2020, I said Kinzinger. I remember arguing with Liz Cheney, whom I'd been close to, and we kind of had a falling out in 2019-20. We didn't have a big screaming argument. We just sort of drifted apart because she had stuck with Trump, and she didn't think I should be for Biden and so forth. Or at least I shouldn't be so vociferously, maybe. But she, to her credit, broke unapologetically and unequivocally, and didn't look back, so to speak. But there's so few. I guess that is really startling.
Look, when I think about the evolution of Trumpism, to me, it started as a movement, then it moved into cult, and then cult wasn't strong enough for me. And to me, it became a religion. And there was a phase where, like, the evangelicals, when they would touch his head and his body, and there was all this religious stuff, and then they were calling him, their God or whatever. And that's not even strong enough for me. And to me, today, what it is a mob. It's a mob. He's the godfather. All your former colleagues, all the people in the party today, I literally feel like they fear their life is in danger, literally. And you look at his foreign policy, like you look at what he's doing with Brazil. He's imposing these huge tariffs to get Bolsonaro out of prison and away from the legal challenges he has. Like, to say that we are in uncharted territory. I mean, if I said to you that was a scene in Goodfellas, you'd be like, oh yeah, I believe it.
I mean, I think that's a very good point. I have a good friend with whom I've discussed this so often over the last bunch of years. He's always kind of a student of, the mob, not a real student, but, reads about it and watches the movies and stuff and has thought about it and actually worked in some areas of business in New York where he encountered, versions of it. And he's always thought the mob boss side of Trump has been underestimated, underreported, and that Trump has a shrewd understanding of, you got to say. And he has some people with him who do. But I think it's a combination, don't you think? I mean, he's now combined. This is why he's so dangerous, really. In a way, he's combined the mob boss, which we're not totally unused to in American politics. Think of urban leaders a century ago or something. The mob boss with the kind of cult leader, with a little bit of a dash of the religion. And that's also been shocking to me. I had a lot of friends, acquaintances with some real friends in kind of Christian evangelical world. I mean, if you hung around Washington in the Republican Party for 30 years, you do. And the degree to which they seemed to have, and they were serious about it, they were earnest. It's not quite my thing. Not my thing at all, because I'm Jewish, but I mean, not even my thing in terms of religious style or way of thinking about it. But it was, I respected it. It was sincere. And it wasn't, incidentally, some of these people turned out, obviously, were total hypocrites, and God knows what they were doing in their private lives. But some of these people weren't. And some of them, decent people, gave money to charity, volunteered in places and stuff. And it just, the degree to which they were able to talk themselves into going along, and not just going along, but getting enthusiastic about it, and then getting very hostile to people who didn't go along, right? I mean, that's the other side of it. The purges. That's more like, I don't know what that's like. Well, I know what it's like. It's like the Soviet Union or like other real authoritarian regimes, right? Where it's, deviancy, even if you've been a loyal soldier, you deviate once and you're as bad as someone who's been, on the other side for 10 years. So it combines all these elements in a very dangerous way, I've got to say.
I've had Ron Reagan on this podcast, and I asked him the same question I'm about to ask you. If you could channel your inner Reagan, what do you think he'd say looking at this Republican Party today?
I'm curious to know what Ron Reagan said, but I mean, I think he'd be pretty horrified. I think he was a grown up in politics. He went along. He had parts of his coalition that he knew were a little kooky and a little bigoted, honestly. And the Southern strategy was something he sort of inherited from Nixon, but he didn't repudiate it. But at the end of the day, on the big issues. And I'd say this is true of Reagan. It was very true of George H.W. Bush. It was very true of George W. Bush. 10 days after 9/11, did he visit a mosque, I think, and said, this is not a war on one faith. I mean, I think they understood there were lines, and they really didn't, and they wouldn't cross those lines. And Reagan was certainly, immigration is a good instance, incidentally, for Reagan. He probably could have benefited politically by maybe appealing to some of that, and he wouldn't do it. And so. I do think he would be, he might have gone along for a bit. He might have tried to see the, upside in a way a little more than someone like me, but he would not have gone along with this, I don't think. What did Ronald Reagan think?
Basically the same thing. He said my father would just be outraged, I mean, all the things you could imagine what he said, he basically said.
I mean, one thing I've thought about a bit is some people ask, how hard was it for you? And it wasn't honestly very hard. I just think I did the right thing. I also think I was older, so I didn't feel like I was giving up 20 or 30 years of a career ahead of me, which I do very much respect the people, including my younger colleagues at the Bulwark, who really jumped off into uncharted waters, as you put it. And they had a pretty good career going at age 36 or something here in Washington, and they could have gone along so easily. And they're so much more talented than most of the Trump people. They could have been very, they could be the people we're seeing on TV in the White House and so forth. And they really chose not to. They've done fine. The Bulwark's done fine. I think they're happy with the choice they made. I know that personally, but it was a bigger risk for them. And but I think in talking to them, I'm also struck that people who are 40 grew up in such a polarized environment, and this is one of the things that made possible Trump, unfortunately, that for them, it was a little harder to cross the aisle, than it was for me. And I think this is true of Reagan, too. Reagan was a Democrat. He voted for Roosevelt. So he changed, and the party's changed. He always said the party left him. Whatever, some truth to that, but mostly he also just changed his mind. He read some things. He went through some strikes in Hollywood where he was dealing with sort of left-wing elements in the unions and stuff. And he became much more of became a strong conservative, obviously. Still, if you've been on the other side, you know they're not all demons, right? You know that they're not evil people. You know that they just disagree with you. You know that you still have friends. I mean, this is true for me. I'd say this struck me when I came to Washington. I didn't have that many close friends who were active Democrats. I had a couple, like Moynihan, whom I worked for. I was an older generation, but I remained close to him. But I would strike up conversations with Democrats, and it wasn't hard. I mean, I didn't find this is a weird. I've just had a weird, meeting or a lunch where I got along well with some Democrat my age or something like that, or a Democratic member of Congress. It was just, I took that for granted. And I was struck how many other people in Washington, but it's then especially, I'd say, as you got younger, actually, ironically, in a way, who were like, well, I don't think I could have that. That's strange that you really get along with that person, or that you had, you go to people like Scalia and Ginsburg, Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg, they go to the opera to get together. How weird is that? I don't know. It's not weird at all. I literally we didn't quite have as good seats as they had at the opera, but we also like opera, and we go to the opera, and we go with people of different political persuasions, because we've gotten to know them over the years. So I think I was a little helped, actually, by having been a Democrat, in sort of seeing that this party identification should not be, in my opinion, a core part of should not have been, in the past, at least, when both parties had decent people in them, a core part of one's identity.
Well, it is so tribal today, and toxically tribal. I mean, I've heard this expression 1,000 times. You probably lived it on some level. Maybe you were even part of it when Reagan and Tip O'Neill would go for a beer. Maybe you were at the table having a beer with them. But it just seems like those days, it's impossible now, because it's not about, let's have a beer and talk about deregulation. Now it's like, you're a racist, I'm not. Okay, you want to send people to a prison and with alligators around. Like, I don't, like this. We're now talking about cruelty and human rights and civil rights and issues that really make us look in the mirror and say, am I like that? Because if I'm not, how can I be a friend of someone like that? How can I have someone like that in my life who, it's like, as long as my taxes are lower, I don't care if black and brown people get locked up or whatever, or discriminated against, or it just seems like the game has changed. It's no longer about ideology and policy. It's now about just how we're treating each other as human beings. And that's a game changer. For me, at least, it is.
No, same for me. I mean, some of my friends have written about this, actually. And Holly Berkeley Fletcher is a very interesting person, wrote a piece saying she can't deal with these people. I mean, she doesn't want to deal with these people. And she just is so offended, and so thinks it's so wrong what they're doing and what others are defending that they're doing, that she's not screaming and yelling at them all the time. She just doesn't choose to fraternize with them. But she has a friend who sort of takes the other attitude of, well, you got to try to work on them, bring them over, and you can't cut off, and so forth. And she wrote a very interesting piece saying, I don't agree with my friend, but I respect his thinking too. I mean, it's not a crazy point of view. And as long as he keeps to his principles and doesn't sacrifice things to get along, there's some people who probably should go ahead and do what he's doing. But I was trying to think, there have been some, obviously, I guess race, does this come back to race? The equivalent would be in American history, don't you think, sort of, I don't know, 100 years ago, I guess, being in the South somewhere, and maybe you were a decent person, you wouldn't fraternize with people who actually lynched, blacks. Would you fraternize with people who didn't prosecute the people who lynched the blacks, who defended them, who were kind of the respectable cover for them? One would say, God, that's terrible. On the other hand, you're living there, and the guy's a prominent person in the community. Maybe he's doing some good things also. He's supporting some charities. I don't know. I mean, I feel like that's kind of people do. I'm struck on people who are making difficult choices in that way, though. And again, that's something we were blessed not to really have to do much. I mean, there were racists one didn't consort with. There were anti-Semites one didn't consort with, one denounced. When I was happy when Buchanan got purged from the Republican Party. So that was a case where I was on we can't consort with this, we can't tolerate this side of things. And I still am basically on that side, because that's my own personal judgment. But people are young people, I think, have to make kinds of choices that we didn't have to make. I mean, in terms of, this person is defending stuff that I find really intolerable. Is he a could he be a friend of mine here in, college or law school or young professional networks or whatever? Or, it's not healthy. But it's not healthy. I also think we shouldn't be both sides-ish about it. It's not healthy because Trump mostly and Trump supporters created this situation. I mean, for all of the intolerance of the left, and there's been some of that, obviously, in cancel culture and all that, it was such a different scale. I mean, it was annoying, but it wasn't really anything like this.
No. Do you believe there's a path back to the kind of conservatism you once championed, that this party can ever return to the party of Reagan, Bush, Kemp, McCain, Bill Kristol?
I think returning in politics is hard, and especially after these 10 years. 10 years is a long time. I mean, there's a whole generation of people who, of course, never have seen a Republican Party that wasn't dominated by Trump. If you're 50, if you're 25, 30 years old, that's, maybe you remember a tiny bit from before then, but not much. So I think return, no. And whether the party could shed Trump at some point and then shed Trumpism mostly, and then make its way to a forward-looking version of Reaganism or McCainism. I hope so. I would be healthier for the country. You hate to have to depend on one party winning all the time, which is kind of the situation we're in, as we're seeing now. You lose by 2 percentage points in a national election, and suddenly we are where we are. So I don't know. It's one of the big challenges we face.
We're 16 months away, and I know we say this every election now, but we are 16 months away from what I believe is the most critical election in American history. Reagan Democrats, the party would love to get back. The working class, they've lost young people, they've lost young men, they've lost Hispanics. What do you think the party needs to do or can do in the next 16 months to appeal to these folks and get them back so they can win something in November of 26?
I mean, I think the good news, if you want to put it this way, is that off-year elections are mostly about the president. I mean, if you just look at the data, my friend Ron Brownstein, has looked at this carefully. It's the single best predictor of the vote is the president's approval rating, basically. People do have the sense that, especially if his party controls Congress in the first 2 years, they have the sense if they're not crazy about a lot of what's happening, put the other party in charge, and at least we get it to check the president for the final 2 years of his first term, or in this case, second non-consecutive term. And so I don't know that the Democrats, there's a ton they need to do to think through things and get some new leadership, and I think make a big generational change. I think that's very important for 2027, 2028. And I don't mean to minimize. It's also great to the degree it can happen in 2026. I'm very happy in Virginia that I'm supporting. I did a co-host of a fundraiser for Abigail Spanberger. I'll vote for her in November. She'll win. She'll be an excellent governor of Virginia. Mikey Sherrill will be an excellent governor of New Jersey, in my view. They're both entered politics in 2018. They didn't climb up the traditional way. I think the more people that can run who are like them in 2026, like what they were in 2018 in 2026, non-traditional politicians, younger politicians, people coming out of businesses where they see how much damage, or areas of life where they see how much damage Trump has done, foreign policy world, which is what they're both from, military and intelligence, but also people who worked at NIH, people who work in, at the Justice Department, people who work in business, people who are just citizens and just kind of are horrified. I think to the degree the Democratic Party can capture that, I think that would be very important. I don't know that they have to endlessly litigate all their centrist versus leftist fights. There's going to be a left wing of the Democratic Party. There's going to be a centrist wing of the Democratic Party. I personally would like the centrist wing to be a little stronger than the left wing. I think it is actually just more of them. But that in a way that's always going to be a little bit of tension and jostling. I think the generational turnover is very important. And this is an article just yesterday I saw. I mean, it's striking how many people who are 80 years old are running for re-election. And you do think at some point, I mean, what are you doing here? It's one thing if you have super expertise in some area and but these are just politicians, It doesn't really, the world will live if they get replaced by a 45-year-old, mostly they're in safe districts. It's not like they're the only ones who could win their seat. I mean, they like being members of Congress. They think they're doing a good job. Fine. But, I don't know. What do you think about that? Don't you think they should step aside more?
Oh, absolutely. And I was talking to someone the other day, and they were pointing out that almost all of the people in Congress who die are Democrats.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Because it seems like the Democrats refuse to let go.
Yeah.
They refuse to say, I'm not going to run. I'm stepping aside.
I saw this even 10 years ago. I remember talking, I think this was true, in 2015, I think it was. I did a quick look at the membership of Congress. And the Republican conference, for the first time, I think, anyway, had become younger than the Democratic conference. You would think of the Republicans in the old days as the old party, Bob Dole, and, all these characters, Dick Lugar, fine people, but they'd been around for an awful long time, And Democrats were a little more Clinton and then Obama at the presidential level, but not at the congressional level nearly so much. And now it's sort of ossified more. I mean, the Biden 4 years, whatever his virtues and whatever his limitations, really imprinted that on a lot of voters' minds. I do think the degree to which the Democrats have a problem that's partly they just need time to take care of it because it's a hangover from Biden. You know what I mean? He was president. I mean, most voters, William and I, are very interested. We follow maybe this person, that person, but I mean, voters, the party is defined by the president of the party or the presidential candidate of the party. Harris obviously is younger and all that, but Biden was president for all that time and then didn't step aside the way he should have, in my view, in 2023. I mean, not as president, but as candidate. And so I do think there's some of that's a hangover. We're only 6 months after the Biden presidency. I think that gets better just because of time. But I do think, it would be better to have a lot younger and different candidates. I think some of them are showing up in some states, though. So I'm a little more optimistic than some of my friends that some of the Democratic stuff will kind of fix itself. But then there's some issues they've got to come to grips with and so forth. So much depends on 2027 and 2028 and who wins it. What will presumably be a big fight for the Democratic nomination.
Mm-hmm. This is a great segue into the last thing I want to ask you about, which is this phenomenon, New York City mayoral race we have going on here. Because the guy who looks like he's probably going to be the next mayor is a 33-year-old Muslim, Democrat socialist, all the things you would think aren't possible in New York City. And I'm curious to know from your perspective, because everything we've been talking about is about the pendulum having swung so far to the right. Now it's swinging in New York, but also in other parts of the country, swinging so far to the left. Do you think that's a natural response to Trump and Trumpism, and that it's where the party needs to go now in order to get back to a place, whenever that may be, of more centrism, which is where most of the country is on a lot of the issues? People kind of are in the middle. Or do you just see this as an isolated case in New York? Or do you not even think he's going to win?
I think he'll probably win. I mean, I think he won, though, partly. Look, he's impressive. He's a very, very good politician. I say that, honest way. I mean, he really is impressive. As a young man, he's really learned how to be a very good politician very fast, and he's a very bright guy, obviously. I'm not as scared of him as a lot of my friends are in terms of what he'll do, and there's some positions I wish he didn't have or wasn't still defending, and I would have been my first choice. But on the other hand, the choice voters ultimately got faced with is him or Andrew Cuomo. It's a little hard to blame voters for going not for Cuomo and not for Eric Adams at this point. And so that'll be the race. And I guess the Republican candidate, who's some kind of lunatic, I think, Sliwa. So, I think he'll win.
Hey, he kept the train safe in the 70s, though.
Good point. Yeah, I know. It's like funny how these guys never go away, right? I mean, with all due respect to him. What was the name of that group? Something Angels? Not
Guardian Angels.
Guardian Angels, as opposed to Hells Angels, I guess. No, I remember liking that. That was impressive what they did, but it's a long time ago. I know. But I would say this. I mean, I think we'll have 3 big elections in November: Virginia, New Jersey, and New York City. Amusingly, they're kind of all about the same size electorates. Virginia and Jersey are a little bigger than New York City, not much. New York City's a big city, and one's going to elect presumably a lefty, young, progressive Democrat, and the other two, Virginia and New Jersey, are going to elect a moderate, pretty young, hawkish, Democrats with national security backgrounds, one military, one intelligence. So I think that's a pretty good mix, honestly. And I kind of think that's where the party is. And I think, Mikey Sherrill is as legitimate an expression of disgust at Trump and a better way forward as as Mamdani. I mean, I don't think Mamdani. I mean, the press will focus a little more on Mamdani. He was in New York, and he's an interesting story, obviously. But no, I don't think that's necessarily the future. I do think, though, the New York establishment. I had friends there. Oh my God, Mamdani. You know, what were they doing? Why did they let Cuomo be the only alternative? There are plenty of people in New York City who are like Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger. There are plenty of 45 and 50-year-old business people and other veterans. You don't have to be a veteran, but you know what I mean. Whatever you want to be, right? Celebrity, even, right? Okay. Who could have been put up, you know? And the idea that was the choice that they were left. They were sort of unable to get their act together enough to have a viable alternative to Cuomo, and they all kind of ended up accepting him. Well, we know him; he'll be okay. We can work with him. I think they wildly underestimated how A, he did screw up badly in the pandemic. B, the personal stuff is pretty appalling. And they looked over and they underestimated how much that would really turn off voters. So I think it's a little bit of peculiar circumstances with Mamdani, but he's impressive, and people need to learn from him. Just the way he campaigned. I had friends who were slightly involved in the race, and there was polling, I think, a week out, 5-6 days out. That was very close. I mean, Mamdani down by 2. People were surprised it was that close. Ranked choice voting, it looked like it would almost be even, you know. And then he ends up winning by, about 8 on election night and 12, I think, when they distributed the votes. And that, I think, was due to that last weekend. He had momentum. But that thing he did on Friday when he walked the length of the island, right? And it was all over the news, especially in New York. I have friends and relatives in New York. And he did it very effectively, I mean, I'm sure he advanced people sort of working out where he was going to go, but it seemed very unstaged. He had conversations with all manners of people, including people who didn't support him, and older people and younger people, and you know, and it was just so well done and so impressive. And meanwhile, Cuomo's being driven around in his town car, you know, to 2 or 3 staged photo ops. And I do think that had a huge effect on voters who were less political. They don't agree with Mamdani about whether, you know, various issues necessarily. They just thought, I mean, this is much more interesting and genuinely impressive, you know, than Cuomo. So I think that was a large part of it.
Bill, this was great. Thanks for coming on, and do come back.
I'd love to, and thank you. I really enjoyed it.
All righty. Take care.
Be well.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.